you guys doing? Welcome back to the channel. I thought I'd go through more focused on the mechanics of how what I've been doing recently works before I get to the playthrough of that. I talked about it briefly in the last playthrough, but there's been some subtle changes since then, etc. Go figure. But bear with me here. I think if you're like me, this might interest you. So what I've started with is this as a base, and a while back I ran through using, this is the third edition, which is significantly different from the previous editions. We'll get into that. Namely, the spent die check is probably the most significant difference with the third edition from the previous editions. And the way that works within this game is you pick a unit to activate, you conduct an action, then you roll to see if he's spent or not, if he's done. And there are percentages of when this unit that has been activated will be spent, and they also work in action costs, so depending on what the unit does will also play into how quickly the unit becomes spent. So for instance, firing, moving, rallying, all of these are actions that cost a certain amount, and that amount varies from German to Soviet depending on which side, but suffice to say, you conduct an action. Let's say it costs one action. You're going to roll a spent check after he conducts that action, and there's a 20% chance that he will be spent after that one action. If he's not, you conduct another action with that same unit, check to see if he's spent. After that second action, it goes up, right? There's a 30% chance that unit is done. Eventually, you're going to get to 7 actions, which is the most possible amount of actions you could take, and he's guaranteed to be done after that because you can't roll better than 100%. So then it becomes the opposing side's turn. They activate a unit, check to see if it's spent, etc. Back and forth. And I kind of worked that into the Napoleonic thing a while ago. Pretty much verbatim, activate a unit, check to see if it's spent. If it's not, good for him, he can do another thing. Back and forth, and it worked good enough, I guess, and then I kind of left it. Well, I've come back to it, but I've done it differently, and instead of doing it the way they do it, what we do here is we activate, or I should say we roll to activate a unit. So it's kind of in reverse fashion, whereas here you activate a unit, roll to see if it's spent. You're going to roll to see if the unit activates to begin with, and if the unit succeeds, instead of rolling to see, instead of conducting another action with the same unit and rolling to see if he's spent, you will then switch, you'll mark him as spent and switch to a different unit. Roll to see if he activates. If he does, conduct your action. Switch to another unit. Roll to see if you activate. If he does, do your action. Mark him as having activated. And it's the same concept, more or less, with each separate unit you activate. The chances of you crapping out, if you will, the percentages are the same. So conceivably, you could activate up to 6 units in one go. That is to say, a particular side. And that works nicely with, because what I've done here is with the commands and colors Napoleonic stuff, it works nicely with that because when you're rolling through with the cards to determine which section activates how many, I think the average, or I shouldn't say the average, roughly the most at any one time that can activate, I think, is 6 units, because there are certain cards that say activate a number of units equal to the number of cards in your hand. And I'm not sure, but I think there's only ever 6 at the most in your hand. So that coincides nicely with the number of units that could possibly activate. I think on average, you're going to get 3 units that activate. And that also works nicely with the average number of units you can activate with the cards. So mentioning the cards and the sections in Commands and Colors Napoleonics, you do not pay attention, doing it my way, to the left, center, and right. That is expunged. And the cards you don't use, so those are negated as well. And we have, or I should say I have, the typed out version of this, which I will I know I've said this before about other things, and I have, but I've been kind of lazy with the last 2 or 3 things I've done. Post this on the Napoleonics site, so you can download them and fiddle with them at your leisure. There's some more complicated added on stuff. So if we run through these, again, set up according to any Commands and Colors scenario. And I've said this before, I'll say it again. Why Commands and Colors Napoleonics begin with? Because there are so many, focus, camera. Because there are so many scenarios for, I'm looking at the screen to see if I'm focused. There are so many scenarios for Commands and Colors Napoleonics. When you consider, you have the base game, you have the Spanish expansion, the Prussian expansion, the Austrian expansion, the Russian expansion, the epic expansion, the generals, marshals, and tacticians expansion, and someday, who knows when, the Le Grand Battles expansion, which will not just have the Le Grand Battles, but I presume smaller, lesser scenarios as well. A plethora of scenarios to use to mine, ready to play. And that's what's awesome about this. You know, a lot of game systems, especially when it comes to Napoleonics rules, they only go so far, and maybe some people like this, like say for instance Black Powder. It has scenarios, not that many, but it has scenarios. And it gives you kind of a general area of where to place things, but I've always felt like I'm doing it incorrectly. Is this how it was done historically? Little things make a difference, and I don't like that wiggle room. Some people may like it. And I understand a lot of these systems are not hex-based, so it's hard to refine and get more exact as far as the setup goes. But give me something a little more than, say, what Black Powder does. And this is probably one of the reasons I like this. The scenarios have everything set up exactly the way it needs to be, and then you're ready to play, ready to roll. So that's why Commands and Colors Napoleonics. And so what things to consider with this is, additionally, so I said the cards are not used, the left, center, and right sections are ignored. There's if you're familiar with Commands and Colors, the battle back rule. Because of the activation system, we can't have the automatic battle back. A unit will battle back at some point once it's activated, but it's not a simultaneous or almost immediate thing. And then we have the caps, which I haven't gotten into, and the activation checks, both derived from Conflict of Heroes, but manipulated heavily. So we have turns and rounds now, and Commands and Colors Napoleonics, there are no turns. But the turns would consist of activating and then failing and then switching to the other side, activating or failing, switching back. This back and forth thing would be, for lack of a better term, turns. And once everyone has activated or failed to do so, or both sides have passed, that is the end of all the turns, which could be collectively considered as a round. So that brings us to the caps, which are command action points. Again, similar in concept to Conflict of Heroes here. You have command action points. You can use these to adjust die rolls, specifically in this system, to adjust die rolls for activation rolls. So we'll get to that. The way to determine the number of command action points a side receives is equal to the number of on-map leaders in a scenario. And if I can turn the autofocus off. Maybe that will keep it from having a schizophrenic seizure. Now you don't have to, because I think I move my hands a lot. Is that right? And I haven't even been drinking. I've been told I move my hands a lot. Anyway, where was I? I digress. The number of on-map leaders listed in a scenario is always going to be equal to the number of command action points available. So each leader essentially functions as a command action point. A unit must be within command range, that is 3 hexes of a leader, to use a command action point. You know, it's hard to avoid command range within Napoleonic stuff. Almost all of the systems use it. I understand why. Again, it's virtually unavoidable, but there's different ways of doing it. So this command action point availability is kind of a not such a hard-nosed way of working in the command range. Some of the systems make it a do-or-die thing, being within command range. Here, it's more of a bonus supplemental thing. So if you're within 3 hexes of a leader, you can siphon off his command action point to supplement a die roll. If you're within 3 hexes of 2 or 3 of those leaders, you can siphon off 2 or 3 command action points to modify a die roll. You need to determine beforehand which unit is going to benefit from that and declare it. Otherwise, you could, I guess if you're playing solo, lie to yourself and say, well, I was going to do that anyway, and add the die roll modifier after the fact. But be fair to others, be fair to yourself, and declare ahead of time who do you intend to benefit from the modified die roll by siphoning off a command action point. Let's see, the number of command action points available to modify a single die roll may not exceed the number of leaders that are within range of a unit. I already said that. And then use caps, don't use caps at the end of what we call a round. Those caps are automatically reset. Initiative, who goes first? Primarily you will look at, for at least the first to go, the Commands and Colors Napoleonics scenario, who mentions the first player. After that, at the beginning of each round, I suppose, you're going to roll 2 dice 6, 7 or higher. The side mentioned in the scenario is going first will go again. Otherwise, the opposing side goes. This may seem convoluted, unnecessary, but it does give, again, a kind of a unpredictability or variation to the initiative throughout the game. Then I think I've already adequately described our activation checks. Choose a unit. Now, the other thing I should mention is within this, if you have a copy of the 3rd edition Conflict of Heroes game, that's great. Even better, because then you get this couple of these special 10-sided dice. They're what they call weighted. They're not 1 through 10. There's a couple 1s, a couple 3s. So you get my drift. And you'll roll this and compare it to the number above the percentile. Well, you don't have to have this. They list the percentiles of what you need, and I work that in to my little chart here so that you can use a regular 10-sided die and determine what you need to roll higher to activate another unit. If the die rolls higher than the activation check number, the unit may conduct an action being anything you would be able to do according to the Commands and Colors Napoleonics rules. If the die roll is equal or lower, that's a fail. You cannot perform an action. You still mark the unit as having activated, and initiative switches to the other side. After the first unit is activated, the activation check die roll for the second unit. This is kind of an example here, which I've already run through. You activate your first unit. Succeeds, you go to your second unit. It's going to be harder to activate that second unit because then you will need greater than a 30%, or if you're rolling a 10-sided die, you need to roll greater than a 3. Mark each unit that activates. I've already stated that. A unit that has been marked as activated cannot activate again until the next round. A unit that fails an activation roll is also marked as if it had conducted an action. After each side is activated or failed to activate, or all eligible units or both sides have passed, the round ends. Remove all activation markers and start the next round. Now, a couple caveats to that, which I mentioned and I won't go into. It's I do work in facing in here. It's basic. You kind of need it. It's not in normal Commands and Colors Napoleonics, but it doesn't make things too complicated to add facing to this. You're always going to face a hex vertex, and you need to conduct an action to change facing within the same hex without a bona fide move, or you can change facing after you move, when you move into the final hex you move into. Artillery ammunition, I've worked this in for a while now with anything I do. It's pretty standard for me. Each artillery unit is afforded 5 rounds of ammunition. Once you expend the 5 rounds, then you're only allowed to fire at adjacent units with the lowest fire value possible. Forming square, I had to manipulate that just a bit because of the activation system. So here it says forming square may be attempted during opponent's turn even if the unit is marked as activated. An activation check is still required. This is essentially your did they form square or not. And a unit that succeeds will also roll the Commands and Colors rules 1 dice 6 to see if the charging cavalry bounces or sustains a hit. After doing that, you mark the square as having activated if not already marked. The charging cavalry then continues with its attack. A defending unit that fails to form square will retreat 2 hexes, and I admit I can't remember how or why I came up with this 2 hex retreat. I'm going to have to look that up and figure out why I decided that was a good idea. After resolving the cavalry charge, and then is marked as having activated if not already marked. To come out of square is an action that can only be performed during the owning player's turn and also requires an activation check to do so. Essentially, it's an action you're conducting. You have to roll these activation checks to conduct an action. Mark a unit that comes out of square as having activated. Think of it as a formation change, I guess. Then you have your cavalry retire and reform, which is in the Commands and Colors rules, but again, because of our activation checks, that's done a little differently, as well as flags and leader retreat. Won't go too much into those. And the same for taking ground, cavalry breakthrough bonus attack. Combined arms, I've got in here an infantry or cavalry unit conducting melee may attempt to combine its attack with 1 or more artillery units according to the Commands and Colors Napoleonics rules. What I've done with this is essentially work in a group action for combined arms. So you pre-designate all involved units and conduct 1 combined activation check. If successful, determine the number of dice rolled in the attack per Commands and Colors rules, and mark each unit as having activated. If failed, you will still mark each participating unit as having activated. That is the core amendments to Commands and Colors that I used the last go round and have been using for this, or will be using for this. That brings us to some optional, more weighty, unnecessarily complicated things. We've got column and line. I could argue that should be in here as well. And for that, I've got an infantry unit maybe in either column or line. Go figure. Or square, which we've already talked about. And it costs an action to change into line or column, which you'll have to conduct an activation check to see if you can do that. A unit line that intends to move will suffer a +1 die roll modifier to its activation roll. A unit in column that fires has to re-roll 1 hit. And a unit in column that conducts a melee against a unit in line may re-roll 1 miss. So there's your pros and cons of being in a certain formation as opposed to just having column and line in there for no particular reason. Same with limbering and non-limbering artillery. Costs an action to limber and unlimber. You've got to be limbered to move, and you've got to be unlimbered to fire. And then finally, the most weighty of the optional complicated rules. You're going to add, so I use, and I've always done this because I hate the stickers they have for the dice that come with the Commands and Colors games, and I hate the size of those dice. They're nonsense. So I use regular dice, and you just I have 1s and 2s for infantry, 3's for cavalry, I believe, 4's for artillery, 5 for flags, and 6 for sabers. You'll remember it easily enough. But what I've done is, so you see all these, so say you roll, what are these, 6 dice? Anytime, I guess I should say, anytime you roll an attack with your dice, you're going to add a different colored die. This is your red disordered die. How does that work? Fairly proud of this. Add a 1d6 disorder die to each attack roll. If any of the attack dice score a hit, this is not qualified for flags. These are bona fide hits in which a block or stand is removed, eliminated. Check the disordered die. If the disordered die roll is equal to or less than the number of hits, the defending unit is also disordered. Huh? Simple, effective, clever. It works. If the disordered die roll is equal to, disordered units suffer a -1 die roll modifier to their activation check, and a disordered unit must re-roll one successful hit during combat. Disordered cavalry cannot charge, and disordered infantry cannot form square or change formation. A disordered unit that becomes disordered again immediately routes, that is to say retreats 2 hexes toward its table edge. Routing units can do nothing except recover, or rally, whatever you want to call it, and suffer a -2 die roll modifier to its activation roll. A routing unit will continue to retreat 1 hex at the end of each round, whether it, I guess if it fails, it wouldn't matter if it recovers. Suffice to say, it'll retreat 1 hex. Continue to retreat 1 hex at the end of each round until it recovers. Units that retreat off the table edge are eliminated, and after a disordered/routing unit activates, it may then attempt to recover. So you do need, and I've wrestled with this a bit, do you roll to recover before rolling to activate, or do you roll to activate and then roll to recover? So you do need to roll, you need to activate first, and then you can attempt to recover. And I should add, a recover is an action, so once you conduct that action, you're pretty much, what are you doing? You're expressing way too much interest in a table you are not allowed to go onto, and you've been very good about that over the years, and we're not going to start now, okay? Let's see. To recover, roll 1 dice 6. A disordered routing unit that occupies the same hex as a leader is going to recover on a 4, 5, or 6, so 50% chance of recover possibility. A disordered/routing unit within 3 hexes of a leader, that is to say not in the same hex but within 3, recovers on a 5 or 6, and a disordered routing unit 4 more hexes away from a leader recovers on a 6. Disordered units recover completely, and routing units that recover become disordered, so you bump up a level. That's where we stand currently. That's how it is. That's what it's going to be. And some of these late add-ons I haven't actually played through on the table, and there's a flow to things. And if there's too many hiccups and interruptions and flubs, then we have to iron those wrinkles out. But for the most part, having done this with the last playthrough, everything seemed to work out fairly well. Again, I'm quite fond of this system. There are other ways in the past that I have tried to manipulate rules, create rules, change rules, amend things, and quite a few endeavors. Some things I like, some things not so much. But again, as I mentioned at the beginning of this video, this is something that I've come back to, though admittedly done differently. And so yeah, we'll see this firsthand, how all this comes together in this upcoming video. Alright, I would also add that this is video number 498. Been a little over 10 years I've been doing this. I meant to do a 10-year celebration. I didn't. That may yet happen, it may not. It's just another year technically. It's a round number, big deal. 10 years and 2 videos away from 500 videos, so wow. Alright guys, thanks for watching. Suggestions, comments, questions, what do you think of this? Let me know, and we'll converse. Alright, that's it. Take care. Bye-bye.